Nearly 80 people have died in a plane crash in Colombia, but several people on board have been rescued alive. The plane, which was carrying a top Brazilian football team to a tournament, crashed on its approach to landing. Heartbreak for the players who didn't fly and who were left behind to mourn their friends. But there was still hope, with another survivor being pulled from the wreckage of the plane. We'll bring you the latest from the scene of the crash and be talking live to our correspondent in Brazil. Also this lunchtime, Syrian forces have now retaken half the areas of Aleppo held by rebels. 16,000 civilians have fled the fighting. The Football Association says the sex abuse scandal means the UK game is facing the biggest crisis in its history. A crackdown on boardroom excess. The government is about to unveil its plans to curb high levels of executive pay. And caught on camera, are these the government's thoughts on how Britain is going to leave the EU?
In the south, standing by for winter floods, special training for over 1,000 troops preparing to tackle emergency flood defences. And the film by school children highlighting the dangers of sexting and online abuse.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. A plane carrying one of Brazil's leading football teams has crashed in Colombia, killing most of the 81 people on board. But miraculously, several people have survived, including players from the Chapecoense football club in southern Brazil. The team was one of the country's recent football fairy tales. It was promoted in 2014 to Brazil's top division for the first time and was travelling to compete in the biggest game in its history for a place in the top South American Cup final. The plane was en route to Colombia and crashed in a mountainous area just outside the city of Medellin. Joe Wilson reports.
Medellin, Colombia, and the search for survivors. The aeroplane which crashed had been carrying 81 people. Survivors in single figures. Amongst those on board, the Brazilian football team Chapecoense, which had become one of the most talked about in the land. This, their club badge.
As soon as the sun comes out, we'll start working on the transport of the bodies to Medellin. There, we'll be expecting relatives, members of the club's executive board and several foreign journalists who were here to cover what was going to be a joyous occasion and has ended up being a tragedy. Our city and the whole of Colombia's heart go out to everyone involved.
Chapecoense had been travelling to Colombia to take part in the final of the Copa Sudamerica. These pictures are from the departure lounge. The team was only founded in the 1970s and yet had the chance to win a continental competition. It was to be a famous occasion. These images on board the plane show bearded defender Alan Ruschel and goalkeeper Danilo, both initially reported to have survived. Danilo later confirmed to have died. In the past few minutes, a Colombian news agency released pictures reportedly of a sixth survivor, understood to be a Chapecoense player. Yet so often Brazil had seen this team celebrating this season. In fact, it was the kind of rags to riches sporting story that the whole country shared in.
If you look at the internet, everybody was being so Chapecoense, so Chape, which means I am a Chapecoense supporter, even teams, people from other teams. And all of a sudden for this to end this way is just heartbreaking, and it will be that kind of stuff of legend. People will remember where they were when this happened. It's like a Munich event for us.
On the fringe of a Munich airport lies the wreckage of an airliner.
The Munich air disaster of 1958. 23 people died as Manchester United travelled back from a match in Belgrade. It's become part of English football history and a key part of Manchester United's identity. And today Manchester United expressed the club's sympathy on social media, whilst Real Madrid paused in their training session for a minute's silence. All these players know air travel from match to match, from country to country. It's part of their profession. So why did this aeroplane crash? It was operated by the Bolivian charter company Lamia. Bolivian aviation officials have suggested an electrical fault. There are also reports that the plane may have run out of fuel. As the search for survivors continued, Atlético Nacional Chapecoense's opponents in the cup final requested that the title is awarded to Chapecoense. And on Twitter, back in Brazil, the home dressing room with squad members who did not fly. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
We can talk now to our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Daniel Gallus. Daniel, an absolute tragedy for the country. Tell us about the latest on the rescue.
Well, there is still a lot of information coming in from the local press. A lot of it hasn't been quite confirmed. There was the news that another player had been found. There was news that another crew member may have been found as well, but we're still waiting for more confirmation. The death toll right now, as we have it, is either 75 or 76, but we still have to get the final list of all those on board. The plane had 81 people on board. This tragedy is one of the biggest of the kind in the history of Brazilian football, and there's been mourning declared here in Brazil by its president. Also, a major championship final that was occurring tomorrow between two other teams here in Brazil has been cancelled, and the whole nation is just stopped and is watching right now the tragedy that is unfolding. It's quite hard to understand what Chapecoense will do and what this city, what this town will do in order to get its football to survive after this huge, terrible tragedy.
Daniel, thank you. Daniel Gallus there. Russia says the Syrian army has made a breakthrough over the last 24 hours of fighting in Aleppo. 3 areas in eastern Aleppo have been taken from rebels, effectively cutting their forces in 2. The situation on the ground for civilians has been described this morning by a United Nations spokesman as almost beyond the imagination of anyone not there. And the UN is now saying that up to 16,000 people have been displaced. Our correspondent in Beirut, Thomas Morgan, now reports.
Frightened and distressed. Women, children, families fleeing in the hope they can find a safer home. As Syrian government forces and their allies continue their assault, aiming to regain the east of the city that's been under rebel control for the past 4 years, thousands of civilians have been leaving East Aleppo over the past few days. The United Nations estimate that at least 16,000 have been displaced, some moving to rebel-controlled areas. However, pro-regime media have been reporting this morning alone 30,000 have fled to government-controlled zones. And civilians speaking to those news outlets have been scathing about the treatment they received under the rebels. You had to be well connected to receive good treatment, this woman says.
We are thirsty and hungry. We've been beaten. They used to beat us in our own homes.
Food, aid and medical supplies have almost completely run out in the east of the city. The Syrian civil defence say they only have 2 days of fuel left, with several reports of civilians burning anything they can in an effort to keep warm. With no sign of any aid arriving anytime soon, the humanitarian situation in Aleppo is getting graver by the day.
We are helping on the western side. If people are fleeing, we want to get into the east. But you all have seen how hard everybody is trying to make that happen. It's a slow motion descent into hell.
By cutting off supply chains, the regime's tactics have been to force the rebels to starve or to surrender. But their fighting spirit remains. Either we go to heaven or to victory, says a leader to his men. The battle for Aleppo is not over just yet. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, Beirut.
The chairman of the Football Association has said the sport is facing the biggest crisis he can remember. Greg Clark told the BBC that the game had to address the failings which had led to the current abuse scandal. Well, our sports correspondent Richard Conway is at Wembley for us now. Richard.
Well, Greg Clark talking inside Wembley this morning to reporters and talking about the moral responsibility that he feels the FA now has to get to the bottom of these historical child sex abuse claims that have come forward over the past 10 days or so. We've heard very powerful testimony from former players talking about the abuse that they suffered at the hands of a number of coaches. 5 police forces now investigating claims, but Greg Clark, in talking about what it is doing and the FA is doing, talking about the internal review that they are conducting, Kate Gallifant QC will lead that. She will make recommendations in due course about what the FA knew and when and how it can prevent such situations from happening in the future. But Greg Clark was asked specifically today where this stood in terms of crises that the FA has faced in the past.
I think it's certainly the biggest one I can remember. I think the moral consequences of failing to deal with some of these issues in the past we must get to the bottom of. We've got an inquiry led by an external QC who will make sure we know the facts. We've got the annual audit of our child protection procedures going on in the next few months, so we'll check on what's going on. But we're certainly taking it extremely seriously.
Now, also this lunchtime, the government have been responding to an urgent question posed by the opposition in the House of Commons about measures being taken to safeguard children within sport. And Karen Bradley, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, saying that she's spoken to both the FA, the PFA, to ensure that everything is being done to provide a safe space for those players who want to come forward and report abuse, but also to talk about safeguarding measures for children. The Sport Minister, Tracy Crouch, has written today, we're told, to every national governing body, not just in football, across all sport, to remind them of their responsibilities. And there is an emphasis now that the mistakes, whatever they were of the past, cannot be repeated again in the future.
Thanks, Richard. Now, when Theresa May came to power, she promised to crack down on what she called the irresponsible minority of big businesses. And today, the government is publishing its plans to curb executive pay and to tackle boardroom abuses. But it's been accused of rowing back on proposals for workers to have more representation in boardrooms. Here's our business correspondent, Jonty Bloom.
Rowlandson Knitwear was founded in the 1930s, but last year it changed. Now the staff own 60% of the company. Not only that, but workers' representatives meet once a month to discuss how to improve business. And workers have a representative on the trust, which runs the company. The boss loves the idea.
The major decisions, including those major decisions around pay that are made in the business, they have to be approved by the trust. So we have one of our employees, the employee-nominated individual that's on that trust.
And the workers' representative says it makes a real difference.
Give people a sense of value and make people be cared more, which we feel really strongly about is caring. And people more now, they seem to embrace it and they just feel like they feel part of a business.
But hopes that could be the future for British business look likely to be disappointed. Although the government says it wants to bring down the gap between top executive pay and that of average staff, it's not gone as far as many hoped. So it's looking at forcing companies to publish the difference in earnings between the chief executive and the average employee, and introducing binding votes on executive pay packages by shareholders. But the idea of giving workers a role in deciding top bosses' pay has been watered down.
It can't be a case of a glorified suggestion box or an advisory council or somebody else on millions of pounds pretending to be a worker on board. It's got to be somebody who can represent the perspective and experience of working people.
But with the gap between top pay and average earnings widening, even the bosses' organisation admits things have to change.
There should be some restraint in top bosses' pay. The fact is, over the last 18 years or so, the FTSE is roughly where it was then, and bosses' pay is up 300% over that period. There is no question too many bosses are being rewarded for failure.
But with the likes of Sports Direct not paying the minimum wage while the boss made millions, and BHS going bust with a massive hole in its pension fund, restoring trust in business is about more than limiting top executive pay. Jonty Bloom, BBC News.
Private notes made by a political aide have once again been snapped by a photographer in Downing Street, this time relating to a meeting about Brexit. The handwritten notes included the phrase, "have your cake and eat it," in response to the question, what's the model, and unlikely in reference to Britain's membership of the EU single market. The government's denied the notes are an outline of its thoughts on Brexit. Here's our political correspondent, Tom Bateman.
It was just another day of Downing Street meetings. The Conservative MP and party vice chair Mark Field was with an aide. Earlier, as they left the Brexit department next door, a notepad carried by his staff was photographed. It appeared to address a possible stance on Brexit talks. The note said, "We think it's unlikely we'll be offered the single market." They went on to ask, "What's the model? Have cake and eat it." And then, after a reference to the lead EU negotiator Michel Barnier, very French negotiating team. Since the vote to leave the EU, the government has faced calls to say more about its Brexit plans.
I'm proud to say we export cake.
The Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said earlier this year he wanted to have our cake and eat it, a reference to getting the best trade deal without free movement of people.
Has an aide let the cat out of the bag?
I think the only cat around here is Larry.
There was less on show as ministers arrived for a meeting of the cabinet. Downing Street said the notes did not reflect policy, and the Prime Minister wants maximum access to the single market and control over immigration.
I don't recognise the memo or the notes or its content. I'm part of many conversations as a member of the Cabinet Committee on Brexit.
So these were people that had just walked out of the Brexit department?
I don't know who it was and where they had these ideas from.
It can be easy to forget what you're carrying in front of the cameras, but there is a wider point to all this. The private planning going on here for Brexit is creating a very public vacuum into which it seems it's easy for virtually anything to get drawn, including the inky, handwritten notes of an MP's assistant. Labour called for more transparency, claiming Britain appeared to be heading out of the single market.
I think the government have got to come to Parliament and put their basic plan or opening position before Parliament. I accept there's confidential detail that they can't put before the House of Commons, that the negotiations will be ongoing.
Ministers have repeatedly said they won't reveal their Brexit demands in public, but a clue over the response from one EU leader today who said Britain wants to have its cake, eat it, and get a smile from the baker too. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Westminster.
The time is now 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. An aircraft carrying a team of Brazilian footballers has crashed in Colombia. 76 people have died, but several people have survived the crash. And still to come, England lose to India in the second test. They're now 2-0 down in the series.
In South Today, how cold will it get? We'll have your forecast. Also, why not take the plunge? New figures show there's been a dramatic fall in the number of regular swimmers. And Reading pioneers new technology to help blue badge holders find a parking space.
Now, world leaders have begun arriving in Havana for tonight's memorial for Fidel Castro. For the past 2 days, Cubans have been paying their respects to the leader who died on Saturday. Tomorrow, his ashes will be taken around the country, retracing the route of the tour that he undertook in the wake of his victory in the 1959 revolution. Well, our correspondent, Will Grant, is in Havana for us now. And Will, Fidel Castro was a hugely controversial figure in life, and in a sense, the world leader guest list today reflects that.
That's right, Rita. Some of the first off the plane were some of his closest regional allies, Evo Morales of Bolivia and the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro. But of course, his influence extends well beyond Latin America and the Caribbean, doesn't it? In Africa, he was very important in terms of fostering the independence fights there, and African nations will be represented by the South African President Jacob Zuma and Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, 92, himself, of course, 2 years older than Castro was when he died. But of course, this is as much a local sense of mourning as it is an international one. We still have scores of thousands of Cubans coming past this tribute to Fidel Castro here in the Plaza de la Revolucion, and every sector of Cuban society is represented here. Old and young, people working in the state and people coming out of their own volition. People who just simply want to come here and mark this moment of history.
OK, well, Will, many thanks. Will Grant there. BT has been told it must legally separate from its Openreach network division. The telecoms regulator says it's told BT to create a distinct company within its group for Openreach. That's the division which runs the UK's broadband infrastructure. Rivals had wanted Openreach to be an entirely separate entity. Ofcom is now seeking permission from the European Commission to start the separation. The financial watchdog, the FCA, has suggested there could be a further clampdown on high-cost credit, including on rent-to-own companies. These sell furniture and appliances with fees and charges attached, which can leave people owing much more than if they'd bought the item outright. Here's our personal finance correspondent, Simon Gompertz.
Looking at nearly £2,500, £3,000 that I've paid for it.
Dawn North from Port Talbot has paid thousands for a clothes washer, hundreds more than normal for her freezer, and more than £3,000 for her sofa. The weekly payments to rent-to-own companies eating into what she can spend on her kids.
It is worrying. It does affect your health. It does affect the way you feel. You feel inadequate as a parent because your children are going without something.
The biggest rent-to-own company, Bright House, offers a fridge freezer worth £417 for cash for £750 a week with service contract and interest, adding up to £1,170 because it's over 3 years, and a bed worth £498 at £850 a week, or in total £1,326, which Citizens Advice says is too much.
Top of our list of demands on behalf of consumers is a cap on the entire cost of this transaction to make sure that people understand what it is they're in for.
Bright House says the criticism it faces is misleading, that we have a wide range of options, including the flexibility for customers to return the product at any time without owing anything further. If you had the cash and could go straight to the shop, you wouldn't use expensive credit like this, but people feel trapped. And now this business, along with door-to-door lending, catalogue credit and overdrafts at the bank, they're going to be investigated. And at the front of investigators' minds will be the cap on charges for payday loans, which came in last year. They can't be more than the loan itself. So will the UK's financial watchdog cap other high-cost credit as well?
Well, we'll certainly look at it, but it's not where we'll start. To be clear, and this was true when the payday arrangements were put in place, it was very much a last resort in that case of what action is needed relatively quickly to frankly correct some really quite striking problems.
The caution is because regulators have a worry. Put a price cap on places like this and they might stop selling to the most hard-up customers, driving some into the arms of illegal loan sharks. Simon Gompertz, BBC News.
Now, every 3 minutes, someone in the UK suffers a stroke. It's the 4th biggest cause of death and one of the largest of disability. But many people who are vulnerable are missing out on a treatment that can reduce the risk. A procedure which involves removing blockages in the brain with a stent is currently only available to around 600 people a year because of a shortage of specialists. Here's our health correspondent, Smitha Mundasad.
Alice Felix Donai was once a model and then became a mother. 3 years ago, at the age of just 38, she had a stroke.
This was the last normal picture we took together, that I was holding her properly. And obviously she's getting used to it. She doesn't know anything else. But it is very sad to not be able to pick up my daughter.
Alice had a major stroke. The blood going to her brain was blocked because of a clot. But in some ways she was lucky. The hospital she was rushed to just happened to be carrying out a trial to try to reduce the damage by using a new piece of equipment.
All this goes inside the body?
Yes, it starts from your groin.
This is the device. Once a tiny wire makes its way to the part of the brain that has the problem, the mesh expands like a fishing net. It captures the clot, and then that can be removed from the body. The idea is to remove the blockage so vital blood flow can get to parts of the brain that would otherwise be more severely damaged. You can see just how much of a difference it made to Alice on her brain scans. Before the procedure, just trickles of blood get to vital parts of her brain. And now look, once the clot is removed, much more blood is keeping her brain alive. Researchers say now things need to change in stroke care so thousands more people can have access to this treatment.
We would need more people involved in this. We would need more rooms and machines in order to deliver this, and of course to support all this we need more funding, we need more money.
The NHS in England says training up the right staff with the right skills won't happen overnight, but it agrees the procedure could make a difference to more people, and it's looking into the possibility of rolling out innovations like this one more widely. Smita Muntasad, BBC News.
A wheelchair user who's a dancer is taking legal action against a company whose staff banned him from taking part in a competition because they say his chair damaged the dance floor. Fred Walden, who dances with able-bodied partners, says he was humiliated at the event organised by Jive Addiction. He's suing the company for discrimination under the Equality Act. Clive Coleman has the story.
Fred Walden loves to dance.
You've been practising this routine?
No, you make it up as you go along.
Fred's been a paraplegic since 1984. He started dancing 15 years ago, and it's become a vital part of his life.
I think if I hadn't found jive dancing, I'd probably be dead. And it's very easy if you're paralysed to put on a lot of weight. And this, as well as getting the exercise, you know, I get out and meet lots of really, really lovely people.
This is Fred's passion. He's come with his dancing partner Sarah to a Jive event in Oxford. He's the only person in the room dancing in a wheelchair. He's really enjoying himself, and so's everyone else.
But things aren't always this happy. Last year, Fred went to a dance event organised by the company Jive Addiction. He says that for the first time ever, he was told to stop dancing because his wheelchair was damaging the floor.
Anger, embarrassment, because, you know, I'm there with people that I want to dance with, and not only am I being prevented from enjoying myself, I'm also being accused of, vandalism.
Fred is taking legal action against Jive Addiction, alleging discrimination under the Equality Act. Jive Addiction declined our invitation to be interviewed, but in its defence, the company denies its policy, which it says stops anyone damaging the dance floor with any object, is discriminatory. Fred Walden is determined to see his legal battle for integration on the dance floor through to a conclusion. While he does, he'll keep dancing. Clive Coleman, BBC News.
England's cricketers have lost the third test to India by 8 wickets. India hit the winning runs with more than a day to spare and are now 2-0 up in the series with 2 matches left. Patrick Geary reports.
The helplessness of a captain in the pavilion. Alistair Cook's innings over. All he could do now is trust in others, that somehow they'd be able to get England out of this mess. Within 35 minutes, they'd lost 2 wickets. At least Cook could have faith in Joe Root, compiler of a solemn 50. There was, after all, little to celebrate, and trouble was always nearby. Root found it on 78. Ajinkya Rahani's catch said, "No escape, England." So skilled in the art of spin, India possessed speed too. Chris Woke startled by Mohammad Shami. Adil Rashid went 2 balls later. So what was left? Haseeb Hameed, a 19-year-old who would have opened but for an injured finger. Armed with 2 paracetamol, he tried to haul England's lead up to something competitive. So serious was that injury that it ends Hameed's tour. But first a show for family and country. He goes home 59 not out. The novice will be a huge miss. For all Hameed's heroics, England had only set India 103 to win, a journey so short they could afford the occasional bump in the road. Murali Vijay went to Wokes, but Parthiv Patel sped to the target. Victory India's by 8 wickets with more than a day to spare.
Frustrating because I feel as that if there is a performance in this team out here to beat this India team, but at the moment we're just not being able to put the complete performance in, which is what you need to do against a good side.
Results elsewhere mean these sides are numbers 1 and 2 in the world. Right now, it's not hard to guess the order. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
The complete handwritten score of Mahler's Second Symphony has sold for a record £4.5 million at auction. It's known as the Resurrection Symphony and is considered to be the most important musical object put on sale for 35 years. The score had previously been owned by an American businessman who dedicated his life to learning how to conduct it. The new owner has chosen to remain anonymous. Let's take a look at the weather now with Chris Fawkes. And Chris, it feels as if autumn is well and truly over. It is cold.
Yes, you're right, Rita. An early snap of winter. A snap of winter that will have tested, no doubt, those woolly coats and let you know just exactly how warm your coat was this morning. But if you could brave the cold, we did have a glorious start to the morning. A bit of mist over some of the lakes and in some of the valleys across England and Wales. But for many of us, we had these clear blue skies to start the day, and it really was quite a spectacular early start near Port Talbot there in the south of Wales. It was the coldest night of autumn so far, actually, across England and Wales. The lowest temperature got down to -6 in Bala in the northwest of Wales and -7.5 in Oxford's South Newington, setting the new marks for autumn so far. Although we'll have another go at those temperatures again tonight. Now, on the satellite picture, you can see clear blue skies at the moment across England and Wales. We do have a bit more cloud across the northwest. A weak weather front is making its way southwards across Scotland and Northern Ireland at the moment. But in the sunshine, after such a cold start to the day, well, the frost will probably stay on the grass in shade all day today. Temperatures struggling to rise. 4 degrees in Manchester. Well, it should be about 9 at this time of the year, so it is cold for the time of year. Quite a lot of cloud for Northern Ireland and also a fair bit of cloud coming in across Scotland with some bits and pieces of rain gradually trickling southwards. A few showers as well forecast for the Northern Isles, but the showers not lasting too long across the far north of Scotland because there will be quite a brisk westerly wind here. Now, overnight tonight, with the cloudier skies across the northern half of the UK, that should keep the frost largely at bay. But further south, with the clear skies across most of England and Wales, and remember, we still have that Arctic air in place. That's where the air originated from. Temperatures could get down to -9 this coming night. So, if anything, it's going to be even colder. So another freezing cold start to the day on Wednesday. And there could be just 1 or 2 patches of mist and fog to start the day as well. So some of us getting off to a murky start. For most, though, blue skies across England and Wales. Always a little bit more in the way of cloud across Northern Ireland, Western Scotland and increasingly into northwest England. Temperature-wise, 6 to 9 degrees across the north of the UK, but still quite cold for southern parts of England and Wales. But there will be some subtle changes for the latter half of the week because this area of high pressure that's been with us for some time now drifts a bit further westwards and we get the winds coming in round off the Atlantic. So increasingly, it will tend to turn a little bit cloudier and it won't be quite as cold as it has been over the last few days. So temperature-wise in London, as we go through Thursday and Friday, we should see highs of around 8 or 9 degrees. 10 is about right for this time of the year, so it's still a little bit on the cool side, but not as cold as it has been over the last few days. But as I say, we've got a really sharp frost tonight, so watch out for that. Temperatures could get down to -9, Rita, so another one to wrap up warmly.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chris. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. An aircraft carrying a team of Brazilian footballers has crashed in Colombia. 76 people have died. There was heartbreak for the players who didn't travel and who were left behind to mourn their teammates. But there was still hope as survivors were pulled from the wreckage of the plane. Well, that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.